The continuation of the topic research methodology, field methods in psychology, module 5. Again, when we talk about methodology, it is a process, a structure, a lens, a path, a perspective, and an approach in looking at data or experience in the field. Similarly, methodology helps a researcher to focus on a specific kind of data and approach to data. So, ito ay tumutulong sa atin upang maka-focus tayo kung anong klaseng datos ang titingnan natin. At kapag nakuha na natin yung mga datos, anong gagawin natin sa datos? Paano natin ito iintindihin? Paano natin ito ipapaliwanag? So, ang methodology ay magbibigay sa atin ng isang framework, isang pagtingin sa datos. So, meron tayong fundamental methodologies here. Napag-usapan na natin yung case study. So, we also have the phenomenological study, the narrative inquiry, ethnographic study, action research, grounded theory research, and mixed methodology. As I mentioned earlier, we are going to focus on case study. Kasi more or less, kapag na-capture natin ang case study, mas may intindihan natin yung other methodologies. As you will see later, going back to our discussion of case study, makikita nyo na maraming similarities, may mga bagay na nag-overlap within a specific methodology. Okay? For example, when you're doing a case study, pwedeng pumasok dito ang phenomenological, pwedeng pumasok dito ang narrative, and a bit of ethnographic also, depending on the kind of case study we are doing. Pwede rin pumasok ang action research. By doing case study, we can also come up with, develop a kind of theory to explain a specific area in people's life. And last but not the least, when we are also doing a case study, we can also integrate other methodologies, right? And later on, I will be giving you examples on how each of these methodology works. But again, we are not going to dwell on each of them, okay, extensively because of the lack of time. Just for example, just working on an ethnographic study, this will take us another semester, much more when we are doing grounded theory research. But again, we are focusing on case study because more or less, case study will lead us to understand and even how to work on the other methodologies. Okay. Case study. All right, I will not again dwell on this anymore because we already discussed about this, but rather I would like to give an example of a case study which I did. So the title of the case study that I wrote 2015 is, I will be sharing you this paper, okay, soon. The title is The Psychosocial Demography and Resources of Disadvantaged Children in Armed Conflict and Sustainable Community Child Protection Process, a Case Study. So I look into the demography, the psychosocial demography of children, so that is a case. And I also look into the resources of disadvantaged children. So when we talk about disadvantaged children, we are referring to the poor children. Okay. So a case of children in an armed conflict. Right. So I am trying to let surface a case about disadvantaged children on how they deal with the armed conflict. And that would include understanding their psychosocial demography and their psychosocial resources. Just for example, we can also work. Just for example, we can work on cases of schizophrenia. Just for example, we identify at least 5 people who are suffering from schizophrenia, and we'll take that as a case. When we're doing a case study, we can take each as a case, and later on we can compare cases, and when we can look at schizophrenia as a whole. For example, also we can work on bipolar disorder experienced by the students. So we can have samples of students or having who are into bipolar disorder concerns. Just for example, we have 10 cases, so we can work on each case as an individual case, and later on we can compare the cases, and we can look again at as a bipolar disorder as a case as a whole. Now let us now go to phenomenological study. Definitely you have heard about phenomenological study. So we're talking about phenomenon. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, phenomenological study has its own intricacy and complexities. Okay. And it will take some time for you to really master the the specific competency that you need in order for you to conduct a phenomenological study. But again, when you understand case study, you will have a feel on how to do phenomenological study. I remember when I did a study, this was college, but although this is philosophy, but basically the whole paper is basically about phenomenological study. I remember very well when I was in college, everybody in the class was so competitive. You know? It's like yung tipo na yung competitive in a sense na hindi naman nag-aaway-away. It's just a culture of proving oneself better than other people. It's just like proving oneself to be, being able to pull up a an exceptional research. So of course naman, tawag to, hindi ka naman tawag to papayag na parang andoon ka lang sa tabi-tabi. So I come up with a very exciting research, and this is all about Encanto, okay, and making Encanto as a phenomenon of how Filipino understand spirit. So I was trying to dig deeper on on the Filipinos' worldview of spirit. Okay, so what I did is I studied a one very small community who is very well known in their intention, in their engagement with the spirits. So I studied Encanto, their concept of Encanto, and the spirit, the spirit in general. And it was very exciting interviewing people. It's very exciting, uncovering the people's understanding what Encanto is all about, and the general understanding, the general worldview of Filipino, specifically on that community, about the spirit. So this is just a glimpse, very straightforward understanding of what phenomenological study is all about. Again, as I define, as I try to describe each methodology, you can always go back on how we describe case study. Okay, so phenomenological inquiry focuses on that which is experienced in the consciousness of individual. Okay, so it is just like what is the consciousness of this community when it comes to the spirit. Okay, So it is a consciousness of something. Ano ba yung pagkakaintindi ng mga taong ito on this area? It is an orientation towards something. Ano ba yung orientasyon ng mga tao na ito tungkol sa isang bagay na ito? And part of the intentionality is focusing on a specific area of perceptual experience. You're focusing on specific phenomenon. Okay, working on a phenomenon using phenomenology. And basically, when you're talking about phenomenology, it is about your experience of a certain situation here and now. Okay, and that includes how your senses are involved in understanding a certain thing. And the next one is to capture a particular experience experienced by a particular people. So, as I just for example, with this one, I was trying to capture the people's understanding of Encanto. And generally, I would like to capture their general understanding of what the spirit is all about. Right? Unfortunately, hindi ako nakapag-save ng paper na ito. Because during that time, wala pa namang computer. Wala bang computer na? No, we don't have a computer during that time. Okay? And this was my paper when I was in third year college. Again, phenomenological study is intersubjective relationship with the world. Okay, and it talks about people's meaning. And similarly, we're talking about case study as about people's meaning. It is the meaning attached to a language. Because when you're talking about phenomenology, so you're dealing with how people speaks about it. And when people speaks about it, it includes the language, the symbols that they use to describe a specific experience that I have is for example, the encanto. It is so when you're looking at the phenomenon, you're looking at the exact meaning as experienced by the people. You're looking at how the sensory experience of the people toward the encanto. For example, the encanto. Ano ba yung sensory experience ng mga tao tungkol sa mga encanto? Paano na ito nararamdaman? Paano na ito nararanasan? O paano ito nakikita? Kung nakikita man nila. So we're also talking about the meaning in time and context. So, ang karanasan ay nangyayari sa isang panahon at isang konteksto. So, for example, when we are talking about martial law, specifically on how people experience it, I am still trying to dig a specific document that I have because I have interviewed one person. He was then a teenager during that time. He is a Muslim. There is one area in Mindanao, specifically in Palimbang, where there's just thousands of Muslims, male and female, who were killed, and he is one of the witnesses of the killing, of the massacre of the people. Later on, I will be sharing you about that. So this is a phenomenon. The massacre of the people is the phenomenon which happened in that specific community. So what exactly happened? What exactly transpired within that was experienced not only by the mind but also with the senses of the people? And the last one is looking at how the self meets the world. Phenomenology is about looking at the connection of people with a specific experience in the world. And again, just for example, the martial law or the encanto. My experience may be similar to others but different in many aspects. Just for example, when you are working in a community, okay, and this is one of the challenging part here. So it doesn't mean one experience, one person experiencing engkanto, hindi ibig sabihin pare-pareho ito ng karanasan. Okay? So there might be some similarity to certain area, but there must be some differences in other areas. Okay? So hindi ibig sabihin na sa isang komunidad ay collectively pare-pareho ang sasabihin nila tungkol sa isang karanasan. Alright, so I mentioned earlier, so phenomenology is about also, this is not only about how the minds work on a certain experience, but it's also about the sensory experience. It is an ongoing process. It is not static. Okay? So patuloy na nag-i-evolve ang isang narrative tungkol sa isang phenomenon. Looking at the intentions of the real meaning. Okay? Look at the hidden meaning. So may mga bagay na nasasabi ang tao. They might not be aware about it, but there must be a meaning, okay, na nakatago doon na maaaring hindi aware ang mga tao. It is a dialogue between what we bring to the text and what the text bring to us. And this is another challenge when you start writing a phenomenological study, because when you start writing, you have to make sure that we represent every word, every letter that we write on our paper would have to represent the phenomenon, okay, that is coming from the people. Okay, again, take note of that. We have to make sure na nire-represent natin ang istorya, ang phenomenon, ang kahulugan ng buhay, kahulugan ng isang karanasan. For example, kahulugan ng salitang engkanto, kahulugan ng karanasan ng martial law, ng massacre ng mga tao. At habang sinusulat natin ito, idinadala natin ang totoong nangyari doon sa phenomenon na yun sa papel natin. So you have to pay attention to that when you start writing your case study, because it's also similar to writing phenomenological study, that when you start writing your cases, you're actually echoing the cases of your client to your paper. Okay? Baka kasi mangyari, yung case nyo, ikaw na, hindi na yung cases ng mga participants nyo. Okay, this is another people. We have been always talking about millennial people. What exactly is the phenomenon of the millennial people? Lagi natin itong pinag-uusapan, lagi natin itong ginagamit. Social media, news, radio, you say, who's the millennial people, blah, blah, blah. But again, when you start digging deeper into this so-called phenomenon, we're not really even sure about that. But if you want to investigate that, is this really a phenomenon? The basic question is this phenomenon real? Or it is just a matter of social conditioning? Or it could probably be a delusion, okay, passed on from one person to another, passed on from the west, okay, going down to the east, okay? Or is it a matter of just a social media evolution? Or again, as I mentioned earlier, is it just a pauso from the west? Alam naman tayo mga Pilipino, kapag uso sa west, I mean, bigla-bigla na lang nating ini-embrace without even thinking about it. So what does it mean about the phenomenon millennial? Okay, because just for example, another instance is, for example, the Tokhang. So we are very much aware about that during the drug war, when many people died, when many people were captivated, when many people, quote unquote, experienced some abuses from the authority. So just for example, looking at the phenomenon of those who were how will I call this? A family member was accused of drug abuse or selling drugs, who were killed. What's the phenomenon for the family of those who were killed? How does the Tokhang phenomenon experienced by these people? And that can be a good study. Okay, Again, going back again to the millennial phenomenon, that is also a good study because we are not really sure about that. Okay, but we have kept on using and using this term, millennial people. Okay, the next one is narrative inquiry. Again, this is very much still related to case study and the phenomenological study, because case study and phenomenological study fundamentally deals with the narrative. When you start doing your case study, you will be working on narrative, okay, the narratives of people. The only thing is that case study is basically working on a case. Phenomenology is basically working on a phenomenon using a phenomenological process. Now we are working on the narrative inquiry. So let me give you another example of what I did. So the title of this is The Narratives of Children in Armed Conflicts, an Influence to Spirituality and Implications of Psychological Intervention. So here in this study, I interviewed children who suffered armed conflict. All right, this study is an offshoot of what I studied on Pintakasi. So I gathered the narratives of children who experience armed conflict. So I got face to face with them. I visited them in Mindanao and worked on their narratives. So I tried to put together their narratives to understand the aspect of the spirituality and how this aspect of the spirituality can be used as part of the psychological intervention. Okay, and this was published already. And the next one, I did this 2010, but I have not published this yet. So I worked on on the narratives of how many students were 100 plus. And take note, those, it is 400, 300 plus. But anyway, okay, I have talked to each of those students. This is a 1 year study. I was able to talk to each of those students and their narratives of their life burdens. Yung kabigatan ng kanilang mga pinagdadaanan. Alright? I guess one of you are working in this pagdadala model, alright? As part of your research. So I listen to the narratives of the students about their life burdens and look at the narratives of students as an aspect of the mental health. So it's just like I was trying to look at the different challenges na kinakaharap na pinagdadaanan na dinadala ng mga estudyante, at gusto kong makita kung ano mga implikasyon nito, anong relasyon nito sa pagpapractice natin ng mental health. Okay, I will be sharing with you this study, okay, so that you will also have an example on how I wrote the paper, on how I gathered the data, on how I actually conceptualize the whole research design. Okay, so this is an example of, this is the actual picture when I was doing my research on this one, on the narratives of children in armed conflicts. All right, this is the actual photo of my dealing with the children. All of these children, there are only few among many of them, but these were the only people accessible to me during that time when I did the study. Okay, and as you would see later on, I will be talk about the methods. I will be sharing again this picture because this speaks about how I gather the data, what are the methods that I use in gathering the data. So this is an example of a narrative inquiry. So I did not only interview the children as an individual, all right? I also interview them as a group. As you can see that they're working as a group during this time. All right. And when we're talking about the narrative inquiry, so this is the focus here. We're looking at the structure of the story. Hinihimay natin ang istorya. Okay? So, hindi lamang ito looking at the phenomenon, but at this time, looking at the structure of the story. So, this is the focus. So, from the story, then, we extract, let's say, an insight, we extract an understanding, we extract the meaning. We extract a specific, for example, an intervention perhaps that might be present in the story. So the second one is, we're talking about narrative inquiry. It conveys also important cultural and social norms, familiar histories, traditions, and rituals. So these are an important component of the story, because when you're talking about the story, there's so many things happening in the story. And it talks about the narratives of the self, the narratives and society, and the narratives for or of social justice. So we have been talking about this from the very, very start. But very, very essential about qualitative research. This is not only about gathering data. It is also about making difference in the life of people. And it focuses on individuals and how narratives construct and convey their sense of self and related experiences, and make use of interviews and reflective writing. So let me add into this. This is not actually only about individuals. Okay, this is also about a collective. A collective. We can also make sense of the data when we're looking at things collectively. Okay, especially when we are dealing with community. All right. Let me clarify this thing. So when we're talking about narrative inquiry, we can work on this as an individual, like a case study, and at the same time also we can work on this collectively. Just for example, this is not only about individual narratives of children, but I was also looking at this as a collective, because these children live in one community. Okay, so in one way or another, the community relationship, the community dynamics has its own influence, has its own weight in their dealing with their own life and with their own narratives. All right. In the narrative inquiry, we uncover how organizations communicate their shared norms, values, practices through informal stories and anecdotes. Just for example, when we're talking about the narratives of children, this is not only about what's happening with them. It can talk about the services from the government, the services going to the community, how the community have been supporting each other. So this, in short, this is not only about their own story. It can be connected to different elements happening in the life of the children, for instance, in a community. And the next one is, when talking about narrative inquiry, it studies how the mind organizes meaning. Okay, and this is still very much similar to case study and phenomenology. And another one is using story to understand human identity. Okay, so for example, this is especially when working on specific case in psychotherapy and even counseling, we are making use of the inquiry of our clients, right, in order to understand what exactly is happening with this personality, with its own the whole human processes. Okay, and similarly, when we're talking about research, so we can make use of the narrative inquiry to expand our understanding of human development. Okay, and the last one is the telling and retelling of a story. So narrative inquiry is also a repetitive process for us to validate the whole thing. Sometimes we needed to go back to the person that we have interviewed in order for us to, to assess, to validate, and to um, para makita natin yung tawag dito, yung consistency ng story. Okay, so for example, when you are looking at this picture, okay, so what are the narratives that you can discover when you look at this picture? This is an informal settling, informal tawag ito, um, informal place. This is the place of the poor. Okay, this is a place of disadvantaged community. So if you're a researcher, kung naranasan mo na bang makapunta dito sa lugar, I have been into this kind of place many times of my life, and I know exactly. I'm talking about the place that I have visited, what is happening inside. So if you are looking at that situation from afar, at hindi mo pa siya nararanasan, it it makes a lot of difference kapag nakapasok ka na dyan, because you will be able to listen to real narratives of people. Diyan mo mapapakinggan ang totoong istorya na nangyayari sa kanila. And ito ang magbibigay ng kaibahan sa iyong pananaw. Just for example, hindi mo talaga siya naranasan. So, hindi ka makakapag full circle ng pag-unawa kung anong nangyayari dyan sa loob. Okay? So, let's now go to the ethnographic study. So, mas madaling maintindihan itong ethnographic because just for the term in itself, ethnographic study, so maintindihan mo it like talking about ethnicity, it's talk about culture. Okay? So, that's right. So, let me give you an example. So, I have been always giving you this an example as from the very beginning of our course. So, the title of my research in my dissertation is Pintakasi, Empowering a Poor Threatened Community to Deal with Problems of Survival, Implications for the Practice of Clinical and Community Psychology. It took me 2 years in completing the data gathering. It took me 2 years, more than 2 years to finish this paper. Okay? And magpahanggang ngayon, nag-evolve pa tong paper na ito. As I've mentioned to you before, itong paper na ito, although hindi siya na nagpaalam sa akin, ginamit ito sa Senate. I think it was during the time of Noynoy Aquino. Okay? It was used in the, with the Department of Justice. It was used with the report of the police authority. So my research was used as what they call this, as a resource, as a literary resource to talk about what happened during the Mama Sapano massacre. It was during the time of Noynoy Aquino. It was a very controversial national issue during that time. Okay? So ito yung contribution ng research na ito, because it explains, Pintakasi explains the cohesiveness of community relationship, which they call Pintakasi. So the title of the paper of my dissertation research is Pintakasi, Empowering a Poor Threatened Community to Deal with Problems of Survival, Implications for the Practice of Clinical and Community Psychology. Ito yung gusto kong i-emphasize sa inyo lagi. Kapag gagawa kayo ng research, huwag lang yung basta-basta na research. Research na mag-create ng impact sa sarili mong buhay, but as research na mag-contribute significantly sa mga taong sa palagay mo ay gusto mong paglingkuran. Okay? So put that in your mind as a researcher, as a psychologist. Now, when you start thinking of what you do as a psychologist or what you do as a researcher, always think of something that will contribute significantly on the life of people. Okay, so going back. So again, Pintakasi, just to give you a very brief understanding of what the Pintakasi is all about, it's fundamentally started with it fundamentally started with the farmers dahil ang mga farmer ay kulang sa kanilang mga resources, financial resources, wala silang pwedeng tawag dito, asahan kundi ang kanilang mga sarili. So for example, itong mga magsasaka na ito, for example ngayon, magtutulungan tayo. Ngayong araw na ito, lahat kayo na magsasaka ay sa akin muna magtatrabaho. Sa pangalawang araw, ito namang isa na ito, doon tayo magtatrabaho. Ito naman sa susunod na araw hanggang mas tapos nila yung buong cycle ng pagsasaka na wala silang masyadong gagastos and at the same time matatapos nila ang trabaho. So that's what Pintakasi is all about. It started with farming and eventually it was adapted in repairing roads, kapag nasa rural area, kabako-bako ang daan, so hindi na siya madaanan, so kailangan magtulong-tulong ang komunidad para makakuha. Or building bridges, kapag tatawid ka sa mga rivers na kinakailangan mong gumamit ng mga makeshift ng mga tulay, pinagtutulungan nila yon. Paggawa ng mga multipurpose halls, paggawa ng mga classrooms, kapag may mga namamatay, o mga nagkakasakit, ang mga komunidad na nagtutulong-tulungan. So during the time, I extracted. Hindi sila aware na merong, yung Pintakasi, aware sila ng Pintakasi, pero hindi ganun ka-aware ang mga tao about their components. So what I did in my research is to extract the components of Pintakasi. So hindi ko inimbento ang Pintakasi, hindi ko rin inimbento ang components nila. In-extract ko lang sila na I was just an instrument to make people understand. So these are the different components of your Pintakasi. So later on, in the process of research, so given also the situations of the people, poverty, socioeconomic conditions, the ecological peace problems, so on and so forth. So these are many among the many problems of the people. So the challenge of my research is why not use Pintakasi in non-traditional way, and that is using Pintakasi in ecological problems, peace problems, socioeconomic condition problems, so on and so forth. Okay. All right. So why it is ethnographic? Because this Pintakasi is coming from the culture of the people. It is more than a century practice of the people. It is I said more than a century because the oldest is about 98 years old yung na-interview ko. So I was just assuming that it is if it was experienced by a 90-year-old participant. So it means that this practice has gone beyond a century. Okay. All right. So again, this is ethnographic study because we're talking about the culture, a specific culture of the people, which is Pintakasi. So again, we're talking about ethnographic study is generally observation-based research. Okay. True to that, so it's like more than a year. It's almost 2 years observation of what the Pintakasi is all about. Okay, so what I'm saying is that this is not a very simple study. When you're doing ethnographic study, kinakailangan mo talagang bumabad sa isang kultura, sa isang komunidad, okay, sa isang karanasan ng mas mahabang panahon para mas maintindihan mo ito. It is a descriptive, analytical, and explanatory study of the culture, beliefs, values, activities, and practices of one or more small or large groups. Okay, it is an investigation of a worldview of a group. So, as I've mentioned earlier, this is a kind of phenomenological also because we're talking about the phenomenon of people working together. And I have witnessed the Pintakasi in many ways extensively because I have been there for 2 years. So I spent a considerable time in the field to look at the different elements of play. So I mentioned it earlier, Kinakailangan mong mag-immerse. Hindi lang ito sausaw. Kinakailangan mong bumabad sa mga komunidad, sa buhay ng isang community. The researcher and the participants uncover the meaning. Okay? So, hindi lang ikaw ang nag-uncover. Lahat, ang buong, for example, the community. So, I was working, how many communities? About 13, I'm not really sure, I forgot about the number, about 13, 15 communities. Uncovering the meaning of what Pintakasi is. So, the thoughts of the participant shaped the investigation. So, andun lang ako para magmasid, nandun lang ako para tingnan ko ano nangyayari. At ang mga tao ang magsasabi kung ano ang ibig sabihin ng Pintakasi at hindi ako. And later on, I will be explaining more when we talk about methods. All right? Kung paano and the triangulation and the validation of what I found at kailangan ko ibalik muli sa mga tao ang aking nakita upang sa gayong paraan ang tao magsasabi sa akin, tama ang nakita mo. Okay? Ethnographic study is gathered in natural settings. Again, it happened in the bundok, in the sea of that specific place in Mindanao. Okay, so ang mga participant dito ay magsasaka at mangingisda. So, ibig sabihin nito, ang Pintakasi ay nangyayari sa sakahan, nangyayari ito sa isang rural community, at nangyayari ito sa komunidad na malapit sa mga dagat. Okay? It is holistic. It uncovers the totality of the phenomena. Again, this is very much also related to phenomenology because we're talking about the experience of the people, okay, on a certain area of a specific culture, a specific cultural experience. It is multi-modal. So we talk about modality and even methods and methodology. There's so many things happening. Okay, and later on I will be talking about when we talk about the mixed methodology. There's just so many methodology that I have used in this research. Look at the patterns of social interaction. Okay, it is a theoretical development. So, ang Pintakasi ay hindi lamang ito pagpapaliwanag kung anong Pintakasi sa komunidad. So bilang isang researcher dito ay nakabuo din ako ng isang proseso ng isang theoretical na idea tungkol sa isang komunidad, for example, sa community development. Okay? It is telling a story about the culture. So I tell a story about Pintakasi. It is difficult to replicate, definitely. So what I have done is just difficult to replicate. And besides that, those communities that I lived with, that I studied, are unique. Okay, so kapag unique ang komunidad at pupunta ka sa ibang komunidad para tingnan muli ito, definitely maaaring merong mga bagay na pareho, but definitely things will be very, very different because you are dealing here with different demography. We are dealing here with different contexts. We are dealing here with different issues and concerns, different problems. Okay, a different geographical setting. Okay, and it requires commitment, patience, adaptability, flexibility, and observation skills to catch diversity, variability, resources, interactions, individuality, creativity, and spontaneity in a specific culture. Just let me give you an idea. So I worked in this Pintakasi thing. I work with the Muslims, I work with the Christians, with the different denominations, and very importantly, I work with indigenous people. I work with them as individual group within their community, and I also work with them together. The Muslim, Christians, and indigenous people just working together. And it takes not only about professionalism, it is about becoming more tao, becoming more human, and becoming more connected in your passion for people. Okay? So, you just have to make sure before you jump into this kind of study natatanungin mo muna ang sarili mo kung meron kang passion para sa mga tao. Baka mamaya ito pa nga lang mga maliliit na task. For example, academic task, wala ka ng passion. Paano ka pa magkakaroon ng passion para sa mga tao? Kung mismo sa sarili mo, sa sarili natin, wala akong passion sa sarili ko. Becoming more passionate with people is also starting with our own passion within ourselves. Take note of that. We can never ever be passionate with other people kung hindi nanggagaling yung passion natin sa ating mga sarili. And the next one is observations have contextual relevance. So, Pintakasi, may observation of Pintakasi has its own context on that specific communities. Hypothesis emerge as the study develops. So, mas nakikita mo, mas meron ka napapatunayan sa mga bagay-bagay habang nagpapatuloy ang research. Hindi mo siya makukita sa isang upuan lang. Pero habang nag-evolve ang research, mas marami kang makikita at marami kang mapapatunayan sa mga bagay na in-establish mo from the start. Okay? And until the end, doon mabubuo ang mas klarong pagtanaw. Pero hindi rin din natatapos kasi nag-evolve ang mga tao. Okay? So, kinakailangan nag-evolve din ang research natin. So, natapos ang Pintakasi research pero hindi sabihin noon, tapos na lahat. Marami pang pwedeng magbago after my research on Pintakasi. It is a prolonged and repetitive observation to establish reliability. So I had more than like 2 years of revisiting people. Okay? Kaya mas napapolish, mas naiintindihan, mas nagiging pulido ang pagkaunawa ko sa Pintakasi dahil paulit-ulit kong nakikita, paulit-ulit ako nakikipag-usap sa mga tao in a very different situations. The participant's view of reality is different from the researcher's view. Okay, so it's very clear. Okay? Lagi natin itong tatandaan. Yung ating pananaw ay iba sa pananaw ng participants. And what is the most important ay kung ano ang pananaw ng komunidad. Kung ang magiging babo dito ay pananaw ng researcher, ba't pa tayo nag-research? Okay? Kaya nga na tayo nag-research ay para maipalabas kung ano ang meron nandoon. Para maintindihan natin, just for example, kung anong nangyayari sa isang komunidad with the use of Pintakasi. Interview questions, instrument, etc. should be generated in the place. Hindi naman ito stricto. At the very start, pwede naman tayo mag-generate ng questions. Ang ibig sabihin lamang nito, kinakailangan nating mag-adapt, kinakailangan nating mag-adjust, kinakailangan nating maging flexible. Kasi the moment na nandun na tayo sa ground at nakikita natin ang realidad, mas may makikita kang mga questions na mas significant, mas meaningful, na mas may katuturan. Kaya pwedeng magbago yung mga original questions mo. Okay? Pero again, as I mentioned earlier, hindi naman tayo nagsisimula na parang wala tayong dala-dala. Meron na tayong mga dala-dalang mga assumption, mga questions, at pwede itong magbago the moment we step on the ground. Alright. When we talk about ethnography, it could be also a critical ethnography. So, it is a critical theory in action. So, ano ibig sabihin nito? Ang ibig sabihin nito ay hindi mo lamang iniintindi ang isang kultura, pero ang ibig sabihin nito ay mas magiging responsive ka kung ano ang nangyayari doon, for example, sa isang komunidad. And related to this, the concern is to expose oppression and inequality in society towards the empowerment of individuals. Okay? No need to explain about that, it's clear. It promotes freedom, social justice, equity, and well-being. It takes power, control, empowerment, privilege, repression, hegemony, victimization, marginalization, social exploitation as problematic and to be changed rather than interrogated and discovered. So hindi mo lang tinatanong kung ano nangyayari. Pero gusto mong mas maintindihan para makapag-contribute tayo sa pagbabago. Kaya hindi lang tayo parang intindi tayo ng perception. Ano mangyayari sa perception? Kaya kailangan makaisip tayo ng pamamaraan para magkaroon ng pagbabago. Kung mayroong problemang nililet surface ng ating research. Science should lead to social change. Take note of that. Okay? Ba't ka pa mag-research? Wala naman siya i-contribute. Okay? Wala ka naman mapapala kung babasahin mo yung research mo. Researcher has to make a positive change to the world, from being reflexive to being an activist. But as early as this time, you're still young. I advise you to first develop yourself. You cannot give something if you don't have. If you don't have it, hindi mo maibibigay ang isang bagay na wala ka. So, kinakailangan munang i-develop ang sarili. Linangin ang kakayanan. Mag-discover ng kakayanan before you even try thinking about making a difference in the life of people. Yeah, for example, simpleng academic challenges pa ka na, sumusuko ka na. Paano ka pa magkakaroon ng tawag dyan? Paano ka pa mag-create ng change sa buhay na napakarami naghihirap na tao? Kung academic challenges pa lang, walay ka na. Okay? So, yung mga simpleng bagay na ganito, kailangan maging malakas ka muna for you to be an activist, not only a reflexive. So, hindi lang tayo nag-reflect. Hindi lang natin pinapalalim ang ating insight sa nangyayari sa datos natin as a reflection of what is happening in the society. But we are also an activist. We have to act on our discovery. Just for example, when we're talking about the ethnography of human violence, a violation of women, okay, it's a violation of women's rights. So this is very evident in some culture. So magandang pag-aralan din ito. Okay. Then the next one is the action research. Okay. So this is more evident when you're doing education psychology. But this is also, it is not only about happening in education, but this can also happen in in doing community research. So I have given you this as example. So action research is, as an example, I can also again talk about what I have done. Dahil when I did the Pintakasi, hindi ko lang siya describe, but we act on the problem of the people. Alright? Action research, it is an intervention research. So hindi mo lamang siya iniintindi, pero naghahanap ka ng intervention para ma-solve ang problema. Just for example, if you did a study on the attention problem of children in the classroom. So unang-una, iintindihin mo muna ano nangyayari sa classroom. Then later on, kapag nag-surface na, mas naintindihan mo yung buong problema sa attention span ng mga bata. So magbubuo ka ngayon ng intervention at i-apply mo ngayon doon sa classroom mo upang mas makita mo kung mag-work yung intervention mo. Hindi, kung hindi mag-work, di gagawa ko ulit ng panibagong intervention. Kung mag-work naman, mas iintindihan mo ang mga elemento kung bakit nag-work ang intervention mo. So, yun ang ibig sabihin ng action research. So, hindi ka lang nag-reflect o gusto mo lang i-describe ang problema, pero kinakailangan mong i-solve ang problema sa pamamagitan ng action research. Right? So, it is a transformative data collection, knowledge development, and reflection intending to pursue practical solutions. So, kinakailangan magbigay tayo ng practical na solusyon sa isang problema. Okay? It is a critical and collaborative inquiry. It is a combination of action and research. Okay? Mag-research ka in order for you to act. Okay? Then eventually when you act again, then research na naman. It's a cycle of researching, then you act on your discovery. Then eventually you research again on what you discovered, and you react again, okay, on the result. Parang dialectic. If you still remember, your philosophy is about René Descartes, the dialectics, right? Research, thesis, antithesis. Anyway, all right. So that's how it works. right? That you act, that after you discover something in your research, then you act on your discovery. So it breaks the culture of spectator research. So hindi ka lang spectator na parang, uy, ang ganda ng kultura, ang ganda, i-explain mo. Pero paano ka makakatulong? Anong makahulugan na kontribusyon ang pwedeng magawa ng research mo na konkreto at practical na magagamit? So Let's Pentacasi is a very practical thing. So until now, ginagamit ko pa rin siya. Nag-evolve pa rin ang komunidad na hanggang ngayon ay hindi ko iniwan. It breaks the culture, it transforms psychological practices. So, ganun naman talaga ang psychology, di ba? Nagtatransform tayo ng buhay ng tao. Okay. It transforms the problematic conditions of life. Okay? So, sa ating nag-aaral ng psychology, so tingnan mo kung paano mo ina-apply ito sa pang-araw-araw mong pamumuhay. Okay? I'm very much aware meron sa inyo nawiwindang dahil lang sa academics. So, check it out. Okay? So, given the academics that we have, given the challenges of the pandemic, so on and so forth, na dito natin mababalidate, dito natin matetest. Kung meron bang weight ang mga natututunan natin, all that we learn in psychology, and how is that used and applied in a day-to-day basis. Okay? Okay, good. It is a practice-based and value-laden. When we're talking about practice-based, so this is a practical thing. At the same time, what is value-laden, you're talking about social justice, peace process, so on and so forth. You bring in your personal value, okay? Or a collective value of the community. It embraces understanding and solving problems. It is a participatory form of research. So, as I mentioned earlier, for example, when you're working on a classroom, improving the attention span of children, so bahagi ka doon. So, ikaw yung psychologist working with the teacher, so bahagi ka doon, nag-observe ka, tinitignan mo. So, it becomes a participatory thing. This is not only about the teacher and the students, but you also participate in the process of the classroom para mas makita mo yung talaga yung nangyayari sa loob ng classroom. It is a commitment to improve the life of people. Mentioned earlier. So it is really about the people, okay? Making a difference in the life of people. A useful tool for improvement and change. It is intended to change the life of disadvantaged group. So you will see parcel of different methodologies were mentioned here, except that we have to solve a problem. So just for example, the one of the fruits of Pintakasi is we were able to work on our coffee project. Okay? At ngayon ay tumutulong pa rin ako, bahagi pa rin ako ng komunidad. At nag-iisip ko ano mga programa pa ang pwedeng magawa using Pintakasi for community development. So as you see in the picture, the people has already underwent a very scholarly, very scientific way of dealing with the coffee na hindi ibinigay ng isang kumpanya dyan na pinagbebentahan ng mga magsasaka na kanilang mga kape na mismo sila na nakikinabang sa produkto ng mga magsasaka ni kahit isang beses ay hindi sila nag-offer na ititrain namin kayo para maging maganda ang produkto ninyo. Okay, so this is an example of action research, creating results in the life of people. So, when we're talking about the grounded theory, we're talking about grounded theory. It is about going down to the experience first, and eventually coming up with a theory. So kinakailangan mo na bumabad sa karanasan without carrying anything with you, and eventually come up with a theory. Usually, kapag gumagawa this is the general practice, na hindi ka man gumagawa ng review of related literature. nangyayari ang review of related literature kapag nakapag-gather ka na ng data. Dahil gusto mo mapatunayan na ang isang teorya na hindi kinakailangan ma-impluwensya ng ibang teorya. So, kinakailangan mabuuin ng isang karanasan upang kumuha ng isang teorya, ng isang perspektibo na makakapagpaliwanag o magbibigay ng mas malalim na pagpapaliwanag sa buhay ng tao. Kaya nga grounded kinakailangan mong bumabad doon sa karanasan upang humugot ng isang perspektibo. Okay? Alright. This is still another very complicated process in doing qualitative research. Now, when we're talking about mixed methodology, so fundamentally, when you talk about Pintakasi, it's fundamentally all about mixed methodology. All right. It has a flavor of case study. It has a flavor of Pintakasi has a flavor of case study, a flavor of phenomenological study, a flavor of narrative inquiry, a flavor of ethnographic study, a flavor of acquisition research, a flavor of grounded theory research. Okay? But at this point in time, okay, mag-focus muna kayo sa case study. But later on, when you master case study and you become very more involved with people, then you can slowly but surely work on and try another methodology. All right? Just for example, with the grounded theory research. So with my Pintakasi, I was able to develop a community process. Okay, I was able to extract a very deep understanding on how community process can be very, very useful. For example, in Pintakasi process, on peace process, or even socioeconomic development of a community. All right. So that's all for the methodology. And again, I would like to remind you, if you really want to take research seriously, the research should first impact ourselves. Ang impact na research ay unang-una makikita sa ating mga sarili. Dahil, again, muli, nag-research tayo upang mas mapalalim ang pag-unawa sa buhay. At upang magkaroon ng impact ang ating nadidiscover sa research. But first and foremost, ang unang-unang dapat nabibigyan ng impact kapag nag-research ka ay walang iba kundi ang sarili mong buhay o ang sarili nating buhay. Kasi in retrospect, mas marami kang nadidiscover hindi lamang doon sa buhay ng mga tao, pero yung higit sa lahat yung connection mo sa mga tao ito. And the best result of research is our growth as a human being, as a growth as a person, and again, very importantly, your growth as a psychologist. That's all for now. Take care.